I want to take you into the darkest corner of my life. The kind of corner that a young girl should never have found herself in. The kind of corner that tears through innocence, dignity, and hope until you are left with nothing but pieces of yourself scattered like broken glass on the floor. When I look back now, the memory that haunts me the most is not the city lights of Lagos, or the laughter of schoolmates I once longed to join, or even the tears that never seemed to stop flowing from my eyes. It is the image of myself, barely 15, lying on a thin mattress, clutching my stomach, bleeding from a body too young to carry the weight of 5 pregnancies. It is 5. That is how many times my uncle forced me to carry the weight of his sin. That is how many times my childhood was taken from me and replaced with pain too deep to speak of. And that is why I tell my story now, not because it is easy, but because all parents need to watch this. Because somewhere out there, another Lucy is walking blindly into the very trap that nearly ruined me. Before I continue, let me ask you this. Please subscribe to this channel. Not for me, but for the thousands of young girls whose voices are drowned in silence. Leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. Lagos, Port Harcourt, Abuja, Nairobi, London, New York, because it matters that the world listens. And above all, watch until the very last second of this story. Because the ending is not just mine. It belongs to every parent, every child, every broken life that deserves to be rebuilt. Now let me take you back to where it all began. I was born in a small village far from the noise of Lagos. The mornings smelled of wood smoke and wet earth. Roosters cried before the sun, and women moved about balancing water pots on their heads as though their necks were carved from stone. My childhood was not rich in money, but it was full of something that felt safe, something that felt like home. But safety is fragile. Safety, for me, broke the moment poverty pressed too heavily on my mother's chest. My father had long abandoned us. He vanished into the vast emptiness of men who start something they never finish. And so it was my mother and I, living from hand to mouth, patching life together with borrowed clothes and borrowed prayers. I was the child who wanted more. I would sit under the one mango tree near our compound, flipping through borrowed books, dreaming of classrooms that were far away from the dust that settled on our village school's broken desks. I wanted to wear uniforms not torn at the edges. I wanted to speak English not like a visitor but like it belonged to me. I wanted to be someone. My mother, God bless her, saw that hunger in me. She wanted more for me too. But poverty does not negotiate with dreams. And when she could no longer find the money for my school fees, she made a decision that would shape my destiny. She sent me to Lagos, to my uncle. She believed the city would give me what the village could not. She believed her brother would raise me, support my education, and protect me like the father I never had. But she was wrong. So very wrong. I still remember the first day I stepped into Lagos. The city hit me like a wave I was not prepared for. The noise was deafening. Horns blaring, people shouting, buses screeching, sellers chasing after customers with trays of bread and bottles of water balanced on their heads. The air was thick with smoke, fried food, and sweat. I was overwhelmed but also mesmerized. For the first time in my life, I saw skyscrapers standing tall like giants. I saw lights that did not die when the sun set. I saw girls dressed in polished uniforms, walking in groups with laughter that made me ache with longing. My uncle's house was nothing like our mud walls back home. He lived in a block of flats, with shiny tiled floors and windows that opened to a balcony overlooking the street. I felt small there, like a guest in a palace. First, everything seemed fine. He welcomed me with a smile that I would later learn was nothing but a mask. He told me I would go to school, that I would live a better life than my mother could provide. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was family. He was my blood. But blood does not always protect. Sometimes blood is the knife that cuts you the deepest. The first months passed in a blur. I went to school, though it was not the kind of school I had dreamed of. It was overcrowded, with teachers who barely paid attention. But it was still better than the village. I studied hard. I wanted to make my mother proud. But my uncle's eyes began to linger too long. First I ignored it. I told myself I was imagining things. But soon the signs became undeniable. The way he brushed against me when he didn't need to. The way he entered my room at night without knocking. The way he controlled every move I made, isolating me from neighbors, from friends, from anyone who could see the truth. I was young, naive, and afraid. And then one night everything changed. I will not describe in detail what he did. Some wounds do not need to be painted with words. But I will say this: he stole from me what I could never get back. He crushed my innocence under the weight of his power. And when the months passed, I discovered I was pregnant. I was only 15. Child carrying a child. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor, my body shaking, tears soaking my school uniform. I thought of my mother. I thought of how she believed I was safe, believed I was building a future. If only she knew. But my uncle silenced me. He told me to hide it. He arranged for things I did not understand then but would scar me forever. And when it was over, I was left with nothing but emptiness. I thought it was the end. But it was only the beginning. That was the first time my life ended. But it would not be the last. My uncle would drag me through that same fire again. And again. And again. Until my body and soul were nearly destroyed. This is only the beginning of my story. And if you are watching this, I beg you, parents, guardians, anyone who has a child under your care, never assume safety. Never hand over your child to someone simply because they share your blood. I am Lucy, and this is my story. Subscribe now because what comes next is darker, heavier, and more painful than anything I have shared yet. Episode 2 will take you deeper into the years that almost buried me alive. Stay with me. I need you to stay with me. Because the next part of my story is not just painful, it is suffocating. When people look at me today, they see a woman still breathing, still walking, still standing. But what they do not see are the countless times I almost stopped existing. What they do not see are the 5 shadows of children I once carried in my belly before I was even old enough to carry my own dreams. And so I say again, subscribe to this channel, leave a comment where you are watching from, and watch until the very end. Not because my story is special, but because my pain carries a warning. A warning every parent, every guardian, every human must never ignore. After my first pregnancy ended, I thought I would finally be free. I thought perhaps my uncle had taken enough. That maybe shame or guilt would hold him back. But shame does not live in men like him. And guilt. He buried it long before I ever came into his house. It began again almost immediately. The nights of silence. The footsteps in the corridor. The door creaking open when the world outside was asleep. I would lie still, praying he would pass me by, praying the night would end before he touched me. But prayers do not always reach heaven. Sometimes they fall back down, heavy and unanswered. And then, like a cruel pattern written in the stars, I found myself pregnant again. This time I knew what it meant. I knew the bleeding, the pain, the emptiness that would follow. I knew the hush-hush visits to strange places, the way he would press money into someone's hands while my life leaked out of me. I knew the silence that followed, the silence that became my prison. My body was too young to mother, yet it was forced to mother again and again. By the second pregnancy, I stopped counting days. I stopped hoping for school exams or friendships or laughter. I lived in a cycle of waiting. Waiting for pain, waiting for fear, waiting for the next shadow of a child that would never live to see the light. Lagos was supposed to be my dream. I remember standing by the window of my uncle's flat, watching children my age walk to school in neat uniforms, their shoes polished, their laughter rising above the noise of traffic. I remember seeing women with handbags step into offices, men in suits rushing to meetings, cars gliding by with tinted windows hiding lives I could only imagine. Lagos was a city of possibilities. But for me, it was a cage with golden bars. I walked the same streets, but I was not one of them. I carried books, but my mind was too clouded to read. I sat in classrooms, but the secrets I carried were too heavy for learning. Even in the midst of millions, I was completely alone. And the cruelest part, no one knew. To the neighbors, I was just a quiet girl living with her uncle. To my teachers, I was just another student. To my mother, back in the village, I was a lucky daughter living in the city of dreams. But inside me, dreams had turned into ashes. By the third pregnancy, I had stopped crying. Tears became useless. They dried on my cheeks without changing anything. Pain became normal. It sat inside me like a familiar guest who refused to leave. My uncle moved with such boldness that I began to believe I was invisible. He had isolated me so completely that I had no one to run to. No neighbor ever asked questions. No teacher ever noticed the sadness in my eyes. No one ever wondered why I often looked sick, why my body grew thin, why I sometimes disappeared from school. Silence had become my language. And it almost destroyed me. It is one thing to break the body. It is another to break the mind. My uncle had done both. I remember lying on the floor one night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if life was worth living. I wondered if perhaps the world would be better off without me. I wondered if my mother would mourn me, or if she would simply believe Lagos had swallowed me like it swallows so many young girls. I thought of ending it all. I thought of escape not through the front door but through the grave. But something in me refused. A tiny voice, buried beneath the screams, whispered that my life could not end here. That somehow, someday I would rise. That voice was faint, but it kept me alive. The most painful part of it all was the mask. My uncle was respected in the community. He wore fine clothes, drove a car, greeted neighbors with smiles. To the world, he was a responsible man taking care of his niece. To my mother, he was her brother who gave me opportunities she could not. But behind closed doors he was a monster. And I was his prey. That duality tore at my mind. How could one man be two people? How could the same hands that shook neighbors' hands be the same that left me broken at night? The world never saw. And I had no strength to show them. By the time I became pregnant the fourth time, my body was failing. I was weak, sickly, constantly in pain. My schoolwork suffered. My hope for the future dimmed like a candle in the wind. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. My face was hollow, my eyes heavy with sorrow far too old for my age. I was a teenager who felt like an old woman carrying the weight of endless grief. But still I told no one. Because who would believe me? Who would stand by me? There comes a moment when you realize you are drowning, and no one is coming to save you. That moment came for me after the fourth time. I remember lying in bed after another night of pain, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me. My heart felt heavy, my chest tight. I whispered to myself, this is my life now. There is no escape. It was the most hopeless thought I had ever carried. And it almost became my truth. But little did I know, my story was not yet finished. My suffering was not yet over. But neither was my strength. This is where I leave you. Because what came next was the fifth and final time. An ending that nearly killed me but also marked the beginning of my rebirth. Parents, guardians, I beg you again. Do not assume safety for your children. Do not trust blindly. Protect them, listen to them, and never let poverty force them into the arms of danger. Subscribe now and do not miss the story, because it will reveal the darkest chapter yet, the one that almost buried me alive forever. I remember the night my body almost gave up. The night the weight of pain finally crushed me so completely that I thought it was my last breath. I was bleeding again. My stomach twisted with agony. My skin was clammy, my heart pounding like a drum that would soon break. I curled up on the thin mattress that had carried my tears for years, and I thought, this is how I will die. Not in old age. Not surrounded by love. Not after chasing my dreams. But here, in the house of the man who ruined me. In the city that promised me gold but gave me ashes. 5 times. 5 shadows of children who would never take a breath. 5 times my body carried what it should not have carried. And this 5th one almost carried me into the grave. That night I could not scream. Could not move. Could not even pray. My lips were dry, my voice gone, my faith buried beneath years of silence. I felt myself slipping away, like a feather drifting into the dark. And yet somehow I survived. I do not know whether it was God, fate, or sheer stubbornness. But when morning came, I opened my eyes. Weak, fragile, trembling but alive. Surviving that night did not feel like victory. It felt like punishment. Because what kind of life was I surviving for? A life where my body was a prison. A life where my childhood had been stolen and my future erased. A life where my uncle's shadow controlled everything I did, every step I took, every breath I managed to draw. Became a ghost. I walked through Lagos like smoke drifting through air. Present but unseen. Breathing but not alive. In school, I sat at the back of the class, my notebook blank, my eyes staring into nothingness. My classmates laughed, joked, planned their futures. I sat in silence, my future already buried beneath the ruins of what I had endured. In church, I listened to voices singing hymns of hope, but I felt nothing. I could not lift my voice, could not lift my hands. I wondered if God had forgotten me, if heaven had closed its doors. And at home, the walls suffocated me. Every corner of the flat carried memories I wanted to forget but could not. Every creak of the floorboards, every sound of the door opening, sent fear through my veins. I was alive but I was not living. There was a small mirror in my room, cracked at the corner. I used to love mirrors when I was a child. I would stand in front of them, smiling, pretending I was a teacher or a doctor or a woman in a city office wearing fine clothes. But now I could not face my reflection. When I dared to look, I saw a stranger. Hollow cheeks, eyes heavy with sorrow, shoulders bent under invisible weight. I was only 16, yet I looked decades older. I hated that girl in the mirror. Because she reminded me of everything I had lost. Lagos is full of people, but I had never felt so alone. I walked past neighbors who smiled politely, but no one knew my truth. I sat in classrooms full of students, but no one heard my silence. I lived in a house with a man who destroyed me, and still, no one came to my rescue. Isolation is not just being alone. It is being unseen even when you are surrounded. It is screaming inside but no one hears you. That isolation was my cage. And I feared I would never escape it. Even after the 5th time, my uncle did not stop. He carried himself with arrogance, as though he owned me. And perhaps, in his twisted mind, he believed he did. But my body was breaking. My mind was cracking. My spirit was almost gone. I lived each day in fear. Fear that the cycle would never end. Fear that my secret would never be known. Fear that I would one day die in silence, my story buried with me. The fear was constant. It lived with me like a second skin. And yet, even in the darkest corner, a whisper of survival remained. I do not know why it stayed. Maybe because somewhere in my heart, I still wanted to see my mother again. Maybe because deep down I still carried the childlike dream that life could be different. Maybe because pain, no matter how heavy, cannot completely erase the desire to live. That whisper kept me moving. It was faint, but it was there. Told me, do not give up yet. Not yet. I survived the 5th time. I survived the bleeding, the emptiness, the despair. But survival is not the same as living. For years, I carried the weight of silence. But today I speak, because silence kills. Silence destroys. Silence buries stories that must be told. I speak because I want every parent to understand. Poverty should never be a reason to give away your child. Trust should never be blind simply because blood connects you. A predator can wear the face of family. A monster can live inside the very house you send your child to. And I speak because I want every girl like me to know. Your pain is not the end. Your suffering does not erase your worth. You may be broken, but you are not worthless. So if you are hearing my voice now, do not let it pass like just another video. Subscribe because stories like this must be heard. Leave a comment with your city, your country, because the world must see how far this story reaches. Share this with someone. A mother, a father, a guardian. Because one child saved is worth more than all the silence in the world. Stay with me until the very last second of my story. Because though it is drenched in pain, there is still something more. Something beyond the darkness. I almost died the 5th time. My life was almost buried in blood and silence. But what came after would shock even me. Because the end of pain is not always death. Sometimes it is the beginning of healing. And that, is where my story turns. I survived. But survival is not the end of the story. Because when the bleeding stopped, when the nights of horror finally grew quiet, when the body began to heal, I realized something far deeper remained. The scars. Scars on my body. Scars on my heart. Scars on my soul. People think healing is the disappearance of pain. But the truth is, healing is the decision to live with the scars and still move forward. For a long time I carried my story in silence. Even after the 5th time, even after my body had nearly given up, I told no one. My mother never knew. My neighbors never suspected. My classmates never saw past my silence. I wore a mask so well that people believed it. But inside I was still bleeding. I had nightmares that clawed at me every night. I had flashbacks that pulled me back into that room, into those moments. I had days when I could not get out of bed, when the world outside my window felt too bright, too distant, too impossible. Silence became a second prison, just as painful as the first. Healing did not come like a miracle. It did not arrive suddenly, like light flooding into darkness. Came slowly, through small steps, through moments that felt fragile, almost invisible. The first step was realizing I was still alive. That in itself was a kind of victory. The second step was daring to dream again. Tiny dreams at first, like finishing school, like walking in the streets without fear. The third step was finding a voice, realizing that if I did not speak, others would suffer in silence just as I did. Healing for me was not about erasing the past. It was about refusing to let the past erase me. When I eventually returned to my mother, her eyes were full of pride. She believed I had lived the dream she imagined for me in Lagos. She asked about school, about the city, about my future. I could not bring myself to tell her the truth. Not yet. Her face was too full of hope. Her heart was too fragile. But deep inside I knew one day I would speak. Because silence protects no one. And my mother deserved to know. Today I carry scars. Some visible. Most invisible. But I no longer see them as marks of shame. I see them as lessons. The scars remind me of what happens when children are left unprotected. The scars remind me of what happens when poverty pushes families into desperate choices. The scars remind me of the dangers of blind trust, that blood is not always protection, that family is not always safe. But above all, the scars remind me that I am still here, still breathing, still telling my story. Parents, listen to me. Guardians, hear me. Do not let poverty blind you to danger. Do not send your children into homes you cannot see clearly. Do not assume safety simply because someone shares your blood. Questions. Pay attention. Watch for silence in your children, because silence speaks louder than words. Protect them fiercely, even when it costs you everything. One mistake, one act of trust in the wrong person, can destroy a child's entire life. Do not let my story repeat itself in your home. I still walk the streets of Lagos sometimes. I see the lights, the cars, the crowds. I see the city that promised so much and nearly destroyed me. But now I walk with different eyes. I see not just the glitter but the shadows. Not just the buildings but the brokenness behind them. And I remind myself, I am no longer a prisoner here. The city that almost killed me could not keep me down. Healing is not about forgetting. I will never forget what happened. I will never forget the 5 pregnancies, the nights of terror, the silence that suffocated me. But I choose to live anyway. I choose to breathe, to dream, to hope. I choose to turn my pain into warning, my scars into lessons, my voice into a shield for others. That is what it means to heal, not to erase the past, but to rise from it. If you have heard my story, do not let it end here. Subscribe not for me, but for the countless other Lucis who cannot speak. Leave a comment telling me where you are watching from, because every voice adds weight to this message. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. A mother, a father, a guardian, because silence is the enemy, and awareness is the first weapon against it. Do not just watch. Protect. Speak. I was a girl whose life was almost destroyed before it began. But today, I am a woman who has chosen to live. This is my story. Not of perfection. Not of victory without scars. but of survival, of healing, of a voice that will not be silent again. And if my story reaches even one parent, even one child, even one broken soul, it will have been worth it.